Perhaps if I start a little bit about who we are, and then Michael will talk a bit about his background, then I'll circle back and share a little bit about me as well. We're both really happy to be here today, so happy to have a conversation, take any questions that you've got, so please feel free to interrupt us as we go, because I think it makes a better conversation. So my name's Nicole McKechnie. I am Director of External and Corporate Communications at Telstra, and essentially what that means is that I look after everything that happens externally for the organisation in terms of what we say and what you might see on the news, and making sure our executives are out in the media as often as possible in good ways, and obviously responding if we've done something wrong, which we do once in a while, but try not to. So my role is leading the team that looks after everything external, plus I also lead a team that's responsible for communications right across most of Telstra except for the retail part of the business, so the shops and the call centres, etc. But the part of the business that I looked after the parts of business that build the networks for Telstra and look after the finance and the investor relations side of things, and in our international business, because we have quite a substantial international business, and my comms team looks after those guys, both through internal through to external comms as well, so everything from internal through to social through to media. Michael's in my team, and Michael looks after media from a corporate perspective, but I'll let Michael introduce himself, and then, as I said, Michael's going to talk a little bit about himself and his background, and then I'll come back around and tell you a little bit about my background and how I got to where I got to.
Great, thanks Nick. So Nick's the best boss in the world. And,
thanks, Zappa.
It's on tape now.
Yeah, exactly.
So
it's pay rise time, you see.
My day-to-day job is liaising with journalists and talking to them about our story, trying to tell our story in different ways, and the way we tell our story has evolved a lot. I've been sort of doing this job in one way, shape or form for 20 years or so. So it has evolved significantly with the advent of social media. We respond minute by minute these days, rather than the old days where the newspaper was the first thing people read in the morning, and then stories evolved from there. We can touch on that a little bit later in the presentation, but just a bit about my background. I've got 3 kids. They keep me busy away from work. They're 3, 6 and 11. And my wife manages them mostly because I work most of the time. But I started off my career as a journalist, so in radio. So I finished school and came here to RMIT and studied journalism at RMIT in 1992. And my desire was to always work in radio. When I was in year 10 at school, we had the work experience teacher, and the work experience teacher would come up to you and say, "Where do you want to work?" And I said, "I want to work in radio." And my 2-week work experience placement was at a Melbourne radio station, which no longer exists, but it's called 3A. It was called 3AK back in the day, so it was a talk radio station. These days, the only talk radio station we've got here is 3AW, and I suppose the ABC as well. So I fell in love with radio when I was 15, 16 years of age, working in at 3AK. They were in the Channel 9 buildings back in those days, and Channel 9, I'm starting to show my age now.
I know.
The Channel 9 buildings were in Richmond,
Yep.
in just off the Bridge Road in Bendigo Street. So that was exciting. The best thing I did during that 2 weeks was make a coffee for John Farnham. So John Farnham came in one morning, and I was all starstruck because he was a big, I don't know who he is, but he was a big star back in those days, and I was just a gopher doing bits and pieces, and I had to make his coffee. So that was fun. But I learned just about everything there is to learn about radio when I was working in that environment, and I was so enthusiastic that I worked on the weekends for free after I finished my job placement, and throughout year 10 and year 11 and year 12, I was a really annoying kid, and just hung around and learned how to panel operate, learned how to write news stories in the newsroom, and that's how I spent my weekends when I was 15, 16, working at 3AK for nothing. It was $5 a day I used to get, so that was good pocket money, but it was more about enjoying that environment and learning from people who were working in the job. So from that day on, I really just thought that's where I wanted to be. And whilst I was at uni, I got a job. They offered me a job at 3AK, so I started working and studying at the same time. I was doing the morning shift, writing news in the morning, starting at 5 o'clock in the morning and working on the morning shift. So that was a great experience for me. I did that for 3 years and then worked in regional Victoria. There was a change in ownership, which is often the way in media that happens. It's consolidating as it is today. Back then there were changes, so it changed and it became a community station, an Italian station actually, a bilingual radio station, and it wasn't mainstream anymore. So I moved and went to live in Horsham, which is 3 hours from here in country Victoria, and worked at a radio station there, did radio and produced a program, current affairs program, and worked in another regional centre called Horsham, which is not far from Hamilton as well, in regional Victoria. And spent about 3 years away from Melbourne, which was great, learned a lot of life skills, being from an Italian background. My mum would cook and clean and iron for me, and I learned how to do that all for myself as a 20-year-old. So that was good from an experience, from a life experience, but also from learning to adapt to a different environment and learning about different things. We'd talk about wheat and sheep and all those sorts of things, and that's something I never knew about before. And then from there I actually was offered a job in politics. So one of the things I did in Horsham was interview the premier of the day. His name was Jeff Kennett, and he would come onto my show once a week, talk about the politics of the week. He had a regular spot on 3AW in Melbourne and had a regular spot on our network, because we had a network of radio stations across Victoria. And so one day after interviewing him, he called me and said, "You should come and work for me." And I didn't know how to take that. I thought I was probably too kind to him during my interviews. But he offered me a job in his media unit, and I thought there was a great opportunity for me to move back to Melbourne, A, and B, good opportunity for me to work in politics, which was an area of interest for me. So I did that, and that didn't last as long as I predicted, because he lost an election about 12 months after I was there, and we all lost our jobs. So that was the first learning curve for me about working in media and in politics. And then from there, my sort of career really focused on PR and working in different PR roles. Worked in PR agencies. I worked in-house at a financial services company called Wizard Home Loans. It was a non-bank lender. You probably know the guy who started up Wizard. His name's Mark Boris. These days he's more famous for being the Celebrity Apprentice on Channel 9, but he set up a really successful company, and I worked with him, and he was great. And then I worked for a company called AXA Asia Pacific, which is a financial advice company, and I worked there for about 5 years, and now I've been at Telstra for 5 years. So that's my journey. But I also am lucky enough to have another job on the weekends and on some weeknights. So I've still been able to dabble in the media, and I have a weekly show a radio show on SEN, which is in Melbourne, a sports radio station. That's at Tuesdays at 8 o'clock, so I'm going straight there from here. And it's a soccer show, so my passion is soccer, and it's a hobby of mine. And I also, for the last 8 years, have been working with Fox Sports, covering soccer on Fox Sports. So I'm lucky enough that Telstra allows me to be flexible enough to do that, and that's certainly a passion of mine.
I'm not quite as flash as Michael, but I do have a journalist background as well. So I started out I actually grew up in country New South Wales, in a place called Leeton in New South Wales, which is about 5.5 hours from Melbourne and about the same from Sydney. And I went to high school there and was in the same town my whole life, and then started working on the local newspaper. So I essentially went from school straight into the local newspaper, and back in those days, because I'm a little older than some of you, we did cadetships. And so, you know, learning about journalism, you could do that through an on-the-job cadetship. And that was the most amazing experience, because you got to, a bit like what Michael's talking about, you know, you get to do everything. You get to drive the paper to the next town to get printed, you know, ridiculous things like that. You go to sporting events and take photos. So I, you know, became the photographer, as well as got to write some really interesting stories, you know, go to the local council, you know, have to do stories about, you know, car accidents of people that you know. I found that the toughest a lot of the time, but it was this incredible experience, and I had two people who I worked for who were the toughest, most horrid people at the time, but what I learned from them about writing was really critical. And so, you know, if you can get, one of the really big things for me is if you can get really strong writing skills early as possible in your career, just makes such a difference with what you're trying to do, and find some people who can help you to hone those skills, because you know, being a really good writer is really important with what we're doing these days, but with anything that you're doing. So I did that, and then I actually had always wanted to get into radio too. We're learning a little bit about each other tonight. So I went to Swinburne, and I did a course. It was the first time they'd run a course. It was for 12 students, and it was run by the Federation of Australian Radio Broadcasters. I'm not entirely sure if they still exist, that organisation, but it was basically the industry putting people with potential through a radio course run by Swinburne for 12 months, and it was about teaching you the skills and how to work in radio. So I sort of took my journalism skills that I'd learnt and applied that to radio, and loved every second of it. It was the most amazing experience. Out of that, I went to I got offered a job in Tasmania, and it was as an on-air announcer in a music radio station. But again, just a really great opportunity to learn how to, you know, time everything, and to, you know, deal with everything that's coming down at you when you're on air presenting. So it was an incredibly interesting experience. I lasted there about 12 months, because it was when, you guys might not remember this, but it was cold, and it's Tasmania. Hopefully no one's from Tasmania. But it is also, it was when the airline strike was happening, so you literally could not get in and out of Tasmania, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm isolated, get me out of here. So it was a beautiful place, don't get me wrong, but I just felt that, you know, I wanted to be back and connected. So again, I went back to, funnily enough, I then moved into TV, so I had a stint at Win TV, which was a regional radio station based in Griffith, which is about half an hour from where I grew up, and was a news reporter there for around about 3 or 4 years. And again, you know, if you can get that opportunity to really get in and cut your teeth in some of those smaller local radio stations, regional. I know it's so much harder because they just don't exist in the quantity that they did previously, but it's an incredible experience to do that. And I got to read the news every night, as well as do stories, and just things that I would never have had the opportunity to do if I hadn't have been in a much smaller market. So really learnt my presentation skills there. Reading the news is something that, you know, you've just got to be absolutely focused, quick on your feet. You can't show any emotion or facial expressions when things go wrong, because they inevitably do. So working through some of those was quite interesting. Then moved back into radio, because I felt that I probably wasn't quite glamorous enough for TV. So decided to go and move to Wagga, which again was sort of not far from where I grew up, and worked in the newsroom in Wagga, doing reading breakfast news and writing the news for about 12, 18 months, and then moved to Albury and did the same thing in Albury. And again, it was just that, you know, incredible experience, smaller markets where you could really do things that you wouldn't normally get to do in some of those larger markets. At the end of that, and I loved radio, and I was sort of at the point where I was either go to Metro Radio or think of something different. And I felt as though, for me, having the opportunity to really get my teeth into something was really important. And when you're in broadcast, I found that sort of doing particularly radio news, where it's sort of quick and it's a quick read, and it takes, you know, it's a 20-second read if you're lucky, then you just don't get into some of those meatier issues that I really enjoyed to do. So I was actually approached by Victoria Police to come and work for them as a media officer. So essentially to turn to the dark side, as I like to call it, and to work with them on helping them, you know, deal with this enormous amount of news that they have emanating out of their organisation every day. So I did that for for a few years before my husband came on the scene, and we decided that we would move to the UK for a few years, just because he's in IT and that was a good thing to do at that point in time. So being in the UK was an incredible experience because it's a completely different market, so you get to learn, different media, different ways of doing things. I worked for the Conservative Party for the vast majority of my time there, so it was in 1999 through to 2004. And I was there for part of that time with the Tories, and so we went through an election, and we had. We lost, sadly, but I work for a leader who, and again, this has taught me a lot about how people perceive you and how to connect with people. This leader who was in face-to-face was a really personable person, but in front of a camera just did not work. And so he lost because, unfortunately, populist politics is, particularly at that time, I think it's changed a lot now, is the way of the world. If you don't look and sound right or, connect in the right way. I mean, you still need to connect in the right way, but I think it was much more the case back then. But I had the most amazing experience. I got to fly around the country with Maggie Thatcher and, John Major, and during the election campaign, and just some really, incredibly iconic people, and get to know all about them and their idiosyncrasies, which is an amazing experience. I then actually moved into work as basically a political lobbyist for the mobile phone lobby group in the UK, looking at the health and health issues around mobile phones and base stations, and so worked with a lot with the government in trying to make sure the industry did what they needed to do to make sure that people were safe in terms of the emissions from base stations and mobile phones, but also to work with the government to make sure they weren't going to put extra regulation on the operators. So again, a really interesting experience. I found myself at number 10 one day, which was kind of cool. So I got the photo and everything. And then I had a baby, so came back home because it was too far away to have be away from family. And I went into politics as well, but in federal politics. So I worked for a lady by the name of Senator Kate Patterson, who was at the time the Health Minister and then Family and Community Services Minister, and also did a lot of work in Indigenous affairs as well, and women's issues. So really wide portfolio, but incredibly interesting. And it was the time when the baby bonus was a really big thing in Australia, and the government introduced it at that time. I found myself being able to go and, we visited a lot of Indigenous communities, particularly in Northern Territory. There was a community that she sponsored called Whatever, which was literally about 8 hours south of Darwin, and to spend time in those communities and really connect with them and understand their issues and what they were facing, and to try and sort of then work through, well, what policies do you do? How do you work with this? It was a really interesting period of time. And even just things like, our school years are built on terms, right, just because that's the way we've always done it. They have to have, they were saying, why can't we just have a wet season and a dry season term? Because in a sense, they need to work around the different types of weather that comes in, and getting the kids all to come to school at the same time and not to have problems with, flooding causing them issues and not being able to get there, etc., etc. So it was just a really interesting eye-opener. And then I found the travel was a bit too much because there was a lot of travel around the country. So got lured back to Victoria Police a second time. And I basically was the head of media and corporate communications for another 5 years. And again, so many issues that happened during that period of time. And you'll all remember the terrible bushfires in 2009, wasn't it? So myself and my team were responsible for managing the media and communications through that period of time. And we went and visited some, really terribly devastated areas, and met with a whole heap of people who, just had sort of awful times. But that was sort of one of the roles with us was around making sure that we were informing the community, but being sensitive to what was happening. So it was a really interesting challenge from a media and communications perspective. I did that for 5 years. It got very political. It got very difficult towards the end. I decided I'd had enough and wanted to go and walk dogs. That didn't work. My husband told me that wouldn't work. Probably about a day, because I was like, no, I can't do this anymore. I did a bit of consulting because I actually just needed a break. It was a really intense, place to work. And then Telstra came knocking, and I've been at Telstra for 5 years now, and it's the most amazing place. You probably think that I would say that, but I wouldn't want to work anywhere else. Amazing work-life balance, and a great place to work, and amazing people to work with. So that's a bit about me.
Very good. Did you want to
So,
run through?
yeah, why don't we just... Yeah, we just thought it might be useful just to run through some things that we talk about when we're, talking to teams about presenting and how to connect, and then let's just have a chat. Cool.
So as we touched on earlier, the news cycle is changing. So, and look, there is some time when newspapers set the agenda for the day. So they publish a story, and then the radio stations pick up on that story, and it becomes part of the daily conversation. And then it gets picked up by TV at the end of the day. But increasingly, this is the new news cycle. So we last year had some outages where our mobile network went down for various reasons, and the first time we hear about that, despite the fact that we've got many systems in place to alert us to any issues in our network, is when social media lights up. And it doesn't take long for the word to spread on social media. So we obviously are all on social media, we're social media savvy, but when something like this happens, it happens very quickly, and it explodes in that forum. And often online media, so journalists who work at The Age, for instance, will monitor their social media feeds and write a story very quickly because they want to be first to break the story without even contacting us. And even if they do contact us, we probably haven't got the information that we need to be able to provide a comment on what's occurring, because we need to find out exactly what's happened. So that's sort of the way that breaking news happens these days. It often is about rumour and innuendo on social media, and then it gathers momentum from there. It goes into the broadcast and radio and TV, and then the next day it appears in print. So that's the evolution of the media. Part of our team is also responsible for creating content on our channels. So we manage a lot of different channels. So once upon a time, the way to communicate with the media was via press release, and that press release is now probably just one of 10 different pieces of communication that we develop to help tell a story. So video is a really important part of that, and my team has 4 people in it that create content, shoot video, edit video, and experts at creating graphics as well. So the video content we produce is produced for different channels: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. We produce videos for our blog, for our website. So there are multiple channels that we are catering for, and it depends on really the announcement we're working towards, but that is really important. Those stats speak for themselves, and I
think with the media getting smaller and smaller, and there's less people, in as journalists these days, and less and less, which I think is very sad, and we're losing a lot of really good content creators. I think media are relying more on people contributing content as well. So we often, particularly at a local level, will create content for local news, if we're out there filming some stuff, etc. And there were days, I'm sure you'd remember this, where you'd never do that in a million years, take content from organisations like us, but I just don't think media organisations have much of a choice anymore. So yeah, we tend to do quite a bit for the media as well.
A prime example of that is today we had some interviews about an announcement that we're announcing tomorrow, and the Australian and the Financial Review both wanted some photos, and the Australian couldn't send a photographer there because they just didn't have the resources available. In the end, they did get one there, but the Financial Review couldn't, so they asked us to take the photo to send to them. So they'll run our photo tomorrow in the paper, just because they don't have that resource available to them. This is an interesting slide on Facebook. So I catch the train to work, and I noticed that 99% of the people on my carriage are doing this, flicking through their feed, or sending messages to their friends. And the 4 seconds, that's the average time watched on Facebook video today, and that's a stat that we've got from Facebook. We work closely with them. So to capture someone's attention is difficult, given that people are only watching on average for 4 seconds. So that is our challenge, to ensure that the type of content we're creating is the type of content that you want to share with your friend. And you say, and you think about your own habits. The videos you're most likely to watch are the ones that your friend has sent to you or shared with you, rather than something being from a brand that you follow, or an ad that you probably won't watch.
I'm not quite sure what you can do in 4 seconds.
Yeah.
Not much.
And a lot of the way we think about creating videos these days is also, think about how that video is being consumed. So most people now are watching video on their mobile devices. We have something like 16 million mobile customers at Telstra. So when you think about that, that just goes to show you that there are only just over 20 million people in Australia. 16 million customers are Telstra customers, mobile customers, and this is just one of my devices. I have more than one, and a lot of people have more than one device. So people are watching content on their mobile, and most of it is with the sound off as well. So the video's got to be able to tell a story without sound. So that's another challenge for us. I'll let you talk to them.
Yeah, happy to talk to you. So just very quickly, this is our communications approach at Telstra. So, when I talked earlier about how you connect with people, there's the sort of the presentation connect, but then there's a what you say. And I think in organisations I've worked in previously, people sort of have this corporate speak about them, and it just doesn't connect. You're still talking to human beings, whether it's your internal audience or your external audience. So we talk about telling our story well, obviously, but in a really human way. So when we write, we use the same language when we write as we would when we talk. Obviously a little bit, probably some commas and full stops, but we're really conscious of making sure that with the written stuff that we produce, that it really connects well with both our people but externally. We talk about the customer as the customer, because talking about some customer that's a figment of everyone's imagination means you're really not focused on them as the most important thing that you've got to be focused on, and more importantly, big companies like ours, we've got to listen and act when things happen, and so that's really critical. We listen. Social media isn't about us sort of throwing out stuff at people, or in any media that we're doing. It's about a two-way conversation, which is critical. And so this is just a quick, I guess, run through for us to sort of think about when we're doing media. And I think, again, there's synergies across hopefully a lot of the work that you guys are doing as well. It's a little bit, I need glasses for my glasses. But it's about sort of thinking about who's your audience, right? So who are you trying to target? And I'm sure you guys know that, what are they interested in and how do you connect with them? If you're doing the type of work we're doing, do the people that you want to go and talk to have a bias? Do they have a perspective on these things already? What is it? Understand it and get to really, lift it up a little bit and look under the covers and see what you can learn about it. Because if you learn more about other people's perspective, it helps you in terms of trying to tell the story you want to tell. Again, understanding who's doing the interviews, etc. Again, understanding what the journalist knows, getting a lot of background on the journalist, and we do this every day. And then really understanding exactly how to get your message across, and we'll come to that in a minute, but what's the type of story that we're looking to target, who we're looking to target, and what are the questions that you think that you'll be getting or that you want to ask on the current converse. So we sort of break it up into these sort of three things, and you can, as I said, you can apply this in many different ways, both whether it's if you're doing the work we're doing in training people on media engagement, or if you're on air yourself. But what is the key message that you want to get across, and what does it look like? So it's pretty simple. For example, we believe we've got the best mobile phone network. Pretty simple. That's the message. That's what we would want to get out there. But what's the proof? So how do you prove what we've just said? Well, we covered X% of the population, blah, blah, blah. So there's a proof point there. And then the third thing is, what's the take-home message? What do you want people to walk away with? And what does it mean for me? So back to this thing previously where I said, we talk to our customers like they are the most important thing, and they are from our company's perspective. So what do we want them to take away from this conversation? Well, it means that if you're a customer, you're going to get a better experience, and you can get the most out of your smartphone, etc., etc. So I think this is sort of a kind of nice. I mean, it's pretty basic, but it's just a nice three sort of step point to think about when you're crafting messages or thinking about what you're trying to say. That's it. So, yeah, very happy to take questions, have a chat. And look, the Christine thing, I'm happy to talk a little bit about it. I mean, Christine, the Christine issue was that, remember, she'd gone to dinner when the fire was happening, and so she was criticised for that. And I think, that was particularly difficult because she was the commissioner, yet it was a personal thing. So that became actually even more complex because you're trying to sort of pull apart an individual from an organisation, but actually sort of defend her at the same time. Does that make sense? So it was a really interesting time. Look, it's the way that example is the way that we deal with outages from last year or things that happen. It's to be transparent, and it's to be upfront, and it's to apologise if you have to apologise, and it's to own things and own issues, and to be available, and to answer any question, no matter how horrible it is, until the air goes out of it. And so we had an example a couple of years ago at Telstra where asbestos was found in some of our pits in New South Wales, and or in one of our pits in particular, and there was some locals who were quite concerned, etc., etc. And we found that our contractors had been not acting in the right way. But rather than our CEO go out and say, oh, our contractors have done the wrong thing, blah, 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 he stood on the steps of Parliament House in Canberra, because we were sort of called to Canberra because it was quite a big issue at that point in time. And he deliberately said, this is Telstra's responsibility. This is my responsibility as a CEO of Telstra, and we're going to fix this. And this is how we're going to fix it. And it's to have a plan often really helps as well. So if you're dealing with a major issue or a crisis, to have an operational plan, if you like, going forward, to say, this is what we're going to do as a company, and this is how we're going to fix these things. Same with outages last year. We had, here's our plan, and this is what we're going to do. We just were out there talking about it all the time and responding. And I think the worst thing you can do is to shut shop, pull down the shutters, and to not talk about things. Often you just have to get in there, you have to own it, and you have to respond and keep on responding to all types of media, even the ones that might be the most annoying. You've got to get on talkback radio, and you've got to take the tough questions, and you've got to deal with it. It's the only way to deal with these types of things, and I think it's been shown out so many times before. Did you want to add anything to that?
I think just to humanise the CEO. There is a time when the CEO needs to step up, and Nicole mentioned that example. The other example was during the outages. So there was a period where we kept the CEO away from the story because the story was developing, but then there was a point where he needed to come out and address some of the concerns that our customers had, and the confidence they had, or lack thereof, in our network at that point in time. And once he did that, the air, as Nick said, was let out of the story.
And I think, just to add one other thing, I think that it comes back to this confidence. You're showing confidence and being confident in going forward and talking about things. So having the CEO out there talking confidently, having a plan, showing leadership. Leadership is such a difficult and complex thing these days, because there's so much criticism of our leaders, whether it's in politics or for corporates or for other organisations. I think, the best way to deal with it is to show true leadership by standing up in really tough times, and I think that's the best approach. But it's a tough world these days when you've got leaders who are really given quite a hard time. Sometimes it's warranted, but other times I think we're quite a sort of tough society these days.
Yeah, and I think the other thing we've done, which I think Andy was probably one of the first CEOs to do this, and that was to have a profile on social media and have his own Twitter account. And we work closely with him on that, but that's something that he took a bit of a leap of faith, probably about when he became CEO, right?
Yep.
So 2 years.
Yep. 2 years.
Ago. And he's quite active on Twitter, and that also he talks to our customers on Twitter from time to time, and that also helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Fox is a lot easier.
Because it's your passion.
It's sport. Well, it's sport. Sport's life and death to some people. But I grew up playing soccer, and my boys play soccer now. So it's always been part of my life, and to have the opportunity and ability to live part of that, it's like being living a childhood dream, really. So getting on the ground after a game and interviewing the players, and after a grand final, and the coaches, and when there's that raw emotion there is quite special. Not many people have the opportunity to do that. So that's something I really enjoy and have enjoyed doing for a long time. And in terms of switching on and off, I think I'm always on. So especially talk about social media, I have conversations daily with people who are interested in the sport on social media through my Twitter handle, and that's fun. But I think I can keep the two jobs very, very separate. They're very different in a lot of ways, and there are times when I think it's difficult to juggle both. But I've been able to manage to do that for 10 years or so now. So.
Amazing bosses who let him do it.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm joking.
But it's good. You get to see some interesting things on the football field and speak to some interesting people and meet some some big names, and that's always fun too. I think we still are.
Yeah, it's an evolving process. So I mean, even in the 5 years that I've been at Telstra, it's incredible. It's shot through the roof. I mean, we were quite early in a lot of the stuff that we did. So we had a 24/7 Facebook page, which was a customer service page, if you like, and a Twitter handle where people could, say, Telstra, you're, done this to me today, blah, 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 can you fix it? I made that PG. I think, so we always sort of, being a tech company, you'd hope that we were sort of, we got it and we're ahead of the pack, and I feel like we always have been, but yeah, it's just, it's just so fast moving, and to Michael's point, we've got so much that we have to think about every day, and bringing in new capabilities, and you saw some of that stuff there that we put up around social. It's just lots of different challenges, and really important, as I said, for us to be ahead of the pack. We've got our boss is actually the chief social officer for the company, which essentially was the first of its kind in Australia to appoint a chief social officer. But essentially that was about trying to get everyone across the company aligned, because there was lots of different people doing social in Telstra, because it was cool and new and the thing to do. So it was about how do we align right across the company and make sure that everybody is focused on the same thing. It's not about control, but it's just making sure that everyone's pulling in the same direction. And for us, it's about trying to have the bets on the things that are going to matter to and connect with people. We actually own a little bit of Snapchat, which sort of makes us semi-cool. Not us, as in Telstra. And so there's a ventures side of things as well. We're always looking at what opportunities there are in the next big play. But it's fast moving. Like we sit down. There's the things that you can do around geo-targeting, but even more than geo-targeting, just targeting individuals who have got like-minded about things, or certain types of people and demographics. And within companies, there's just this enormous amount of data that you can use to be able to, work out how to get your messages out. So,
I think, and also in media relations terms, talking to the media is evolving, so the types of journalists and media organisations we deal with have been changing. So, Huffington Post and BuzzFeed and these organisations didn't exist a few years ago, and they're interested in something very different to what the Financial Review is interested in. So thinking about those audiences and those publications is a constant evolution for us. So if I'm pitching a story to BuzzFeed, they're interested in something that their global audience is going to be interested in. And what's that? So that might be a story about Outback Australia and how we're connecting the remote areas of Australia and the quirky stories
30 ways we're connecting Outback Australia.
Or Mashable or those sorts of publications. So it's really, every publication is after something different.
And sorry, I was interrupting you. We do a lot of work with pedestrian TV as well. So, we're really trying to sort of, it's really important for us to target those audience, but they actually love to come and talk to us about a lot of the technology plays that we've got as well. So, so we're learning all about that because, Michael and my day, probably around sort of the same age-ish. This stuff that's right, I know. And so it's a different world, I mean, the stuff my daughter does on social, the way they connect and, with the kids these days as 14-year-olds, the way they connect with each other and, the direct messaging through Insta and Snapchat, I'm sure, you guys are familiar with, is just a whole different world. So we've had to change a lot.
And ultimately, they're our customers. They will become our customers. If they're not today as a 14-year-old, they will be as a 15 or 16-year-old because most 15 and 16-year-olds have phones, right?
Yeah.
So, Blink,
you go.
I think a lot of professionals that end up in this field do start off as journalists, and that's often by choice. There's a few reasons for that. The media industry is consolidating, obviously, but I think you're right. You pick up the skills you need to tell stories as a journalist. That's the best grounding for this type of work. And communications jobs in corporate organisations are varied, but those that need to deal with the media day to day, like we do in our role, the most successful will be the ones I think that have worked in the media, because there are some that have gone straight to uni and worked in comms roles, but haven't got that media experience, and I think without that it's difficult to do what we do.
Yeah, I think it's actually kind of cool because you get to go into an organisation and sort of lift up the covers and see what's going on. So you use the skills that you got as a journalist to uncover good stories in our case, I guess, and also to see some of the things that perhaps are issues, and you identify them and work with a company on how they might manage them. But the storytelling is that's the most favourite part of my job. I'm in a role now where I don't get to do as much of that. And I love nothing more than sitting down and writing something. I said that earlier, to have those writing skills and to tell a story, whatever that story might be. And for a company like Telstra, there's some really cool stories that we do have. So being able to do that, there's just it's a really great opportunity, and you're doing it in a way that is actually, as I said, is kind of fun because you can see everything before you. A little bit different than journalism, where you're prodding and probing, and you might not get the whole story a lot of the time. And that's great and amazing and incredibly interesting. But I think I really enjoy being on this side, as I call it, because you get to see a whole different world. Talking a bit earlier with his team, that's what they do every day. So they go out, they film stories, they pull together scripts on and how to position things, and it can be everything from the new Apple iPhone to regional communities and how we're connecting them, or how we're doing one with the Royal Flying Doctor Service in a week or so, where we're helping the Royal Flying Doctor service with our technology. What a great story, that we can actually help that. We've got a community in a place called Joondalup in WA where we've got connected, it's a smart city, there's the first smart city. They've got things like connected bins, where basically they've got these little sensors on bins that you can work out how full the bins are, and a whole range of different, ridiculous things, but quite good fun. Probably important things. That's great. And so just the opportunity to tell those stories, I think that's fantastic. And you're in the best industry in the world for the moment, like filmmaking. That's amazing. The world is your oyster, because there's just so many opportunities for you, whether it's in media or in corporates, or any organisation are crying out for those skills at the moment. And then to be able to tell a story in a way that's engaging and connects with people and is emotional, and because companies like us, we still want to have the emotional side of things as well. It's not just about dry, boring corporate stuff. It's actually about how do we connect with people at that emotional level. So it's very cool.
Yeah, Facebook Live is something we've used a bit as well, and that's a really nice way to tell a story. So a couple of weeks ago, we met up with a guy who is a hang glider, and he's hang gliding off some mountain somewhere, and we were able to Facebook Live this thing, right? So it's just a nice way of telling a story about our network connection and how strong it is, but also show something really cool at the same time. So that's nice storytelling,
For a story, especially at Telstra, where sometimes it's not always.
It's not easy
to find the hook.
No.
Yeah.
No. So you work with people in the business to get an understanding for what the story is, but I think it really comes down to us on becoming creative, because sometimes the business is so focused on what they do, it's difficult for them to see above the table. But then it's up for us to say, okay, well, we're launching 5G at some point in the future. What does that actually mean? And you bring it back to what does it mean for you as a user of your mobile phone, and really start to break it down. So how's my experience going to be any different? And then you can start to build a story from there.
And we also tap into a lot of social media influencers, so we get them to help tell our story, and that's a really nice way of doing it as well, because they've got great followers and can help focus on whatever it is that they're interested in that we may have. So it's a sort of really nice two-way relationship. So, yeah.
Yeah, get out and meet people. I think that's a skill that is you can't place enough importance on that. Just face-to-face contact with people, getting to know people, getting to know their interests. I talk to journalists every day. A lot of them are based in Sydney. And I often don't have a personal relationship with them, and I make sure that whenever I'm in Sydney, I sit down with them, whether it's for a coffee or take them out to lunch, just to get to know them a lot better than what I do in my day-to-day conversations with them. And then that really helps build the relationship, and they're likely to come to you for advice or on other stories that they might be writing, or you might be able to steer them in the right direction. Had a really interesting case of that recently. And because I took the time out to meet him, we were able to find another story for him to write, which was sort of beneficial to us. But I won't say too much more because but yeah, look, I think that's just these days it's really easy to email somebody or send them a direct message on Twitter or whatever. That could be the first point of contact, but meeting people and getting to know them face to face is, I think, it's an old-fashioned pick up the phone, talk to someone, will work really well, hold you in good stead.
Makes it harder for them to say bad stuff about you.
Yeah.
If you've got good, strong relations, yeah. Cool. All right.
That might be everything. Thank you.
Thank
so
you.
much
No
for
worries.
coming in.
Our pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having us.